All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Uh, we've been really looking forward to sharing these the survey feedback from back when we presented the last dry run survey findings at Ceph Day New York. So I'll get into it, but thank you all for joining. And I would like to make this more or less an interactive uh, discussion. So please feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions or about the data or the findings. And if you'd like to, I really want to emphasize sharing your sharing additional feedback in real time. But let's get into it. So I want to start out. Is Yarid on the call with us?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, that's all right. We will back up. But I had some telemetry highlights from the survey. So if somebody can let me know when Yarid is on the call, we'll go back to that. Um, is Adam King on the call with us? Did I hear something?
Yes, Adam's here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Hey, Adam. Thanks. I can't quite see everybody's screen, so thanks for being here. So I'll go through. We asked a series of questions about orchestration, and first I'll preface by saying the survey that we asked focused on orchestration and performance specifically, and we did ask a few other questions around that. But the first question we asked about orchestration was what best describes your deployment target. We had 24 responses total. We would like to see more than 24 responses in the future. So please, if we send out another survey, please, word of mouth is important and we'll keep publicizing this. But from this subgroup that responded, we had most people use bare metal for their deployment target, and there's a smaller amount that use containers, but there is a percentage that uses both. But there did seem to be a slight favor toward bare metal. What describes your orchestration system is another question we asked. A lot of people, over half the responders, chose that they use Ceph ADM. There was the second most popular choice was homemade orchestration systems, and then we had a smaller amount choose Rook and Ceph Ansible. 12.5% chose Ceph Ansible, so that was the second to last most popular, and then there was one person who uses Rook. So that was kind of the quantitative data that we got from there. But we also asked a couple free response questions of people. How do they like their orchestrator? And I pulled the main highlights from what we received. Ceph ADM, of course, was the majority of what people chose. A lot of positives that people said about it was that it's simple, reliable, and it works out of the box, and it doesn't require a lot of prior knowledge of using it. Some caveats that people mentioned were that certain commands are too difficult and verbose. The logs are difficult to debug sometimes. And sometimes there's too much automation. And one theme that came up a lot was OSD creation on drives was too automatic sometimes. The second most popular orchestration that people use is homemade or in-house orchestration, and a couple people mentioned Puppet, so I thought I'd emphasize that. A lot of these users who chose to use homemade orchestration like that they have more control over and trust over their individual orchestration process. So perhaps they don't care much about as much about ease, or it really depends on their own orchestration system, but they really like that they have more individual control over it. Some caveats that were mentioned, though, were that any problems in that area have to be fixed in-house if it's a specific orchestration system, and it sometimes lacks the bells and whistles that Ceph ADM has. Something specific mentioned was blinking disk LEDs. And then lastly, I combined Ceph, Ansible, and Rook, although people were able to choose one or the other because a lot of the feedback was similar. A lot of Ceph, Ansible, and the Rook users, they liked that it's more configurable compared to Ceph ADM. However, a lot mentioned that it requires more background knowledge to use, and then for Ceph Ansible specifically, it's not as maintained in the community. So I wanted to pause on this slide here and offer Adam perhaps a chance if you want to comment on any of this feedback that we got, or anyone else who would like to offer additional real-time feedback, because really what we want to get out of these surveys is we eventually want to edge more toward, rather than saying Ceph ADM is too automatic sometimes. We really like to see specific examples, and something that we can really concretely act on. So if anybody has additional details that they'd like to share about that, please feel free.
I had a quick question. If you could go back to the layout, it may be the way that we asked the questions, but one thing that caught my eye was if you go back to the breakdown of deployment type. Yeah. So yeah. So 8% more people use bare metal exclusively than containers, and then there's an overlap, right? So that's 61% use bare metal and 43% or 53% use containers. But if you go to the next slide, maybe this is just an artifact of the way we asked the question. Ceph ADM doesn't support bare metal deployments. So how is nearly 60% of people using Ceph ADM if their deployments are bare metal? To me, maybe it's the way we asked the question, or maybe there's some interesting stuff to dig into here in the open discussion phase of it, but that just caught my eye as really weird. You would have expected the breakdown to be similar.
Well, I definitely choose both because I have a bare metal host and Ceph ADM, but I choose Ceph ADM over the old deployment.
Okay. That's what I was curious about, is if this question didn't allow you to select both, where we would have seen a similar breakdown and people were forced to pick either one or the other.
So yeah, that's a good point. So we particularly invited folks who had taken the survey. How many of you have actually taken the survey who are here? It'd be good to have some, direct feedback. Philip, you clearly have. Okay, thank you for joining. Yeah, it's worth calling out that this time we also promoted the event through Meetup. So we have a lot of people I'm at least seeing on this meeting list who actually RSVP'd on the Meetup. So thank you, everybody. And I hope that was useful. Anyway, I think, Laura, let's keep moving.
Sure. Is there anything that anybody else wanted to comment about either of these slides about orchestration, or Adam, if you wanted to comment on anything in particular, feel free.
Yeah, I went through all the results yesterday, so I can give some thoughts that we had. So like you kind of pointed out here, we were looking more at, I guess, the negative sides of things. But the two big things that came up as negatives were this automatic OSD creation stuff that you mentioned in here. And then we could put it into a general category of opacity for basically being able to debug and find the logs and everything like that. So we're talking yesterday a bit about maybe what we want to do about that. For the OSD deployment thing, we had thought of an idea of, we were calling it like a one-shot for applying an OSD spec. I want to say that probably the reason that people are having trouble with the too much automation is that if you apply an OSD spec and you let it sit there, it will still, even say weeks later, pick up a disk that you add as an OSD, even if you may have forgotten about that spec and you may have added this new disk thinking it would not do that. And so I think maybe what some of these people might want that would work better for them is something that will match all of the devices on the host at that exact time, and then it'll create those OSDs for you. And then once it's done doing that, it'll sort of turn off. And it'll just sort of sit there in the background and not actually do anything more unless you purposely sort of trigger it again to pick up more OSDs for that. So we're talking about doing something like that for fixing that problem. Also, just improving the documentation for the OSD section. I was looking through that as well yesterday. It's very long, and I think maybe we're talking about some of the ordering of how things are mentioned in there could be fixed up. Like maybe we need to talk about the high level stuff of how the declarative OSD spec works first, and give some examples about maybe how to not do it that way if you don't want it to earlier on, and then we can go into more of the advanced stuff later on. And then also maybe some improved documentation around the filtering would be good, in case that's also an issue people are having where they're not able to create the filters for the devices that they want. Then for the opacity one, it's a bit harder. It's a bit more of a big topic. So we didn't come up with anything concrete yesterday, any ideas, but I was looking at maybe at the idea of trying to have some way of knowing what happened in say the last iteration of the back end like service loop that it does. Because as far as things that are unknown, that would be the biggest culprit, I think. Maybe what we're doing in the background. Maybe we could track that sort of set of actions that we just completed or something like that, and have some way to expose that to the users so they know what we did recently. And then some fix up maybe to the way we gather logs and things like that. There is a Ceph ADM logs command that the binary has, but we were looking at some usability things for that as well, maybe improving that a bit. So those are the types of directions we were thinking of going in, at least off of the survey results we've seen so far. And those two problems I described, and we call it opacity, but it's basically ability to debug and things like that. And then this OSD creation is the areas we want to look at based off the survey results.
Great. And Adam, was there anything that you would like better clarification on from the responses? Because I know some things like might be, good areas to jump off from, but there may not be enough details that were provided, or I'm not sure if anything jumped out to you there, but perhaps something where we could see real-time feedback. And somebody has their hand raised.
Yeah, Gaurav, you can speak before me.
Maybe I was thinking, I mean, here things are mentioned, right? Logs are difficult to debug, but I think it'll be good to have examples, what kind of issues or what kind of situations are good to debug or difficult to debug, because I think that can provide more clarity about where users are actually facing issues while debugging and what kind of issues they're trying to, they're debugging where they're having difficulty. So I think some clarity maybe around that can be useful. Adam, it will be great if you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like what I would ask for from that's more out of the survey would just be, I mean, there are a few responses that are a bit too vague. Like there is one that's what do we not like? The orchestrator says it's buggy and slow. Like it's kind of hard to work off of that to know where to sort of go. So if we knew like say where things are slow, what in particular is slow, what things are in particular are broken, that would obviously help in terms of knowing what to do going forward.
Exactly. Yeah. So I pulled out a lot of the this comment about OSD creation on drives with automation is leaning toward the type of specific feedback that we really like to see, where we can concretely work on something. So yeah, it would be great if community members on this call or elsewhere, if you have specific examples about situations where the logging makes it difficult to debug, raise a tracker for that. And something that we're workshopping right now for the user dev meeting is using the tag function on trackers to track what's being raised in this meeting, so that we can use those trackers to inform what we're working on. So I'll mention that more at the end of the meeting, but if anybody has specific examples where they could raise a tracker, share logs, further details, you can share those trackers with me, and then we'll tag them accordingly, and that will help. Then we can, have something more concretely to work off of for actually addressing these issues. Is there anything, I know Yarit's on the call, and she's a bit time sensitive, so I want to touch on the telemetry bit shortly, but is there anything?
I wanted to ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm taking off my facilitator hat and putting on my user hat, and more of a philosophical question, which we don't need to totally get into here, but is there a reason, like maybe we need to ask these questions more clearly, but given that the community is still split, and I think Philip made a statement that I didn't necessarily think about, maybe the bare metal are legacy deployments and everyone's moving to containers, but has there been a thought to expanding Ceph ADM so that it's not only works with Docker artifacts, right? Separating your deployment artifact from the orchestration itself. So Ceph ADM could still be the orchestration platform of the future and succeed Ceph Ansible, but you can still choose whether you want bare metal, binary RPM-based deployments or containerized deployments, as opposed to having the two bundled together.
Yeah, we actually had meetings about it in the weekly in the past. We sort of looked into how it would be done. I mean, it would be a massive project to undertake. I guess this is the main reason why it's not happening or hasn't been planned. The entire Ceph ADM sort of binary side, I think, would have to be rewritten. It's all sort of built on Podman and Docker commands. So there'd just be a lot of work to do it. There's no specific reason. I think, like you said, it could be possible, but it's very, it's a big project.
Yeah, we're aware of the scope, but I guess that's a promising thing. So there's not a philosophical disagreement that this may be useful for the community to expand that. It's just that this is a lot of work and no one's prioritized it yet. So like supposedly if somebody wanted to go do this, they wouldn't run into a no, we've chosen not to go down that road. Is that kind of what you're stating, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be willing to review and help with those patches. I just don't have the bandwidth to interact with it myself. And what John's saying is true. Maybe it should be its own sort of equivalent to Ceph ADM, maybe not directly tied into it. I'm not sure if the manager module Ceph ADM has could interact with a different binary with those packages correctly and still work. But there's definitely some sort of container-specific artifacts in the manager module. But we could definitely take the model of it, and we did try to apply that to bare metal. I don't have any issue with it.
Yeah, it was more like, obviously this is a huge technical question and this isn't the place to do it, but it sounds like that's at least useful if people have an interest in the bandwidth to do this, maybe kick off some discussions to see if that's something we can do.
Yep.
Cool, thank you.
Great. I'm seeing some comments. More tools, there's a reason why Rook and Ceph ADM are the only supported deployment options. Philip, did you want to speak on that?
Not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, development time is precious. Adding functionality to deploy RPMs or even peak, what is it for Debian? Can't remember. APKs, something else. Not feeling it. So less tools is better.
Less tools is better, and that's why I would have preferred, in a purely academic sense, a single tool that allows you to choose your deployment artifact. Because I think for large scale deployments, there is still some reasons potentially to want to keep things a little bit simpler or be able to dedicate. It's more of, if you force people to use one thing and people don't want to use that thing, you're limiting the adoption potentially of Ceph. So I agree, like not having a million tools for a million different things, but as I stated, Ceph ADM is the orchestration thing to succeed the other tools. We can buy into that. It would just be nice if it also allowed support for our deployment artifact, right? So we could definitely take this offline to a separate technical conversation, the technical parts of it.
Frederick asks, what's the need to keep RPM packages when one can move to containers even on bare metal clusters?
The potential performance impact, and this is again our opinion, is that we're not completely, like, For certain things, we think it makes sense for things that are stateless, so like Mons managers, RGWs, but the OSDs having to pass through the container and tightly coupled to a particular drive or whatnot, it just doesn't feel natural for a container necessarily. So this was kind of our thought process around it.
Makes sense. John says there should be no perf impact by containers. Containers are not VMs.
Right, but it's one more thing in the stack that it will be like the performance impact is probably going to be negligible, but there's going to be some.
All right, we can go back to this topic, but I want to make sure that I go. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say it's similar. Like we're getting down in the technical rabbit hole. I feel like this would be a useful like sidebar conversation.
Yeah, exactly. It's important, but we can always come back to this after we get through the rest of the content here. So yeah, we'll pause, but please, if anybody still wants to discuss this during the last 10 minutes, we can absolutely do that. All right, so moving back to, in the interest of time for Yarit, telemetry. So we did ask a couple of more general questions at the end of the survey. And one of those was, do you have the telemetry module enabled? And 54% said that they do not. So a bit over half said that they don't have it enabled. And then 45% said that they do have it. So it's roughly 50-50, but it does favor no. So then we asked, if you don't have it enabled, what are your reasons for not enabling it? And a lot of people wrote they're not sure of what it does. There's not enough publicity in the community. And something that was pointed out was lack of support for air gap clusters. So that's a topic that has come up before, and perhaps Yarit can touch on. And also concerns about privacy and security policies. And then also I noticed that we asked people what their total raw capacity is that they've deployed. And in the survey, most reported having around 1 petabyte to 50 petabytes of raw capacity. And in telemetry, the raw capacity that most people are reporting is lower than that, around or less than 10 petabytes. So we're not seeing as much over 10. And we even had some people in the survey report that they have 50 plus petabytes. But it seems that these users are not reporting to telemetry as much, and we would like to change that. We would like to see more deployments of scale. So Yarit, I know you have to leave pretty soon, so if you have any brief comments you'd like to offer, please go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Laura. Yeah, I was wondering about the concerns, the privacy concerns. So we take a lot of we make a lot of efforts to make our telemetry anonymized, and I was wondering exactly what the concern is, and whether we can even increase our privacy in some way, or create even a minimal telemetry channel to report the very basic that might not consider of a concern to users. So if there's anyone on the call who replied to the survey and has any concerns, I would be very glad to hear that.
So I can maybe comment on why we don't do it. So it is definitely a concern about privacy and security, but from our standpoint, it is not the full concern. It's also a process concern. So like we'd have to ask our security team to validate that this is an okay thing to do, which in its own is not that long of a process, but then every time we upgrade, we have to re-ask security to review. And so that That's not optimal, and that's just a process, which is, it is what it is. But that means that it slows us down dramatically to do anything, and that's why we haven't really been into it. So I think we put it. I'm not the one who filled out the survey for this time, but I think my colleague put in concern about privacy security, and that's the reason why it's just a painful process for us.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback. I was not aware that it can be cumbersome to upgrade due to that. One thing about our telemetry is that we don't add any collections. If you upgraded and we added any new data, you'd have to re-opt in to include that. So basically, whatever is already opted into will be sent, and if you'll have to re-opt in if we added anything new. So that can help in that sense. But yeah, I understand. If we'll be happy to add even in a channel with minimal information that will just help us understand even the total capacity of Ceph deployments out there that could have a big impact. I saw someone raise their hands.
Yeah, just to add on to Alex's comment, right? If we can document from a Ceph developer or usage standpoint on like, oh, these are the 4 fields or whatever, but the security folks, even for us, will want a say in what gets shipped out. It's like trust but verify, like, oh, it's documentary to send these 2 data points, but like they would literally want to actually look at like, okay, this is the actual 2 things that's going on. So it's more of figuring out how to, that process I would imagine will exist for clusters that would require the air gap concepts or whatever be, so that someone from security can sign off on whatever data is getting shipped out. So whether it be upgrade, no matter what is documented, figuring out maybe it's a standardized process for supported way that these things can be called out or integrated with other security systems or tools or whatever be might be the handy way. But I don't think they will blanket approve it regardless of what we document out from a pure developer and product perspective. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I see. So and basically, if we have a tool that allows to occasionally manually send telemetry, would that be something that could be considered?
I think this, at least for us, the air gap towards our quick and dirty way, where if it's, we have some way to collect it internally, we pass it off saying security people, run whatever scans you want on this data before we can ship it out. So it also becomes a controlled process versus us always publishing metrics.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps from I personally don't have enough background in security to say one way or the other, but from an ease of mind perspective, it becomes a process that they're actively involved in. They want to scrutinize it or pause it for whatever reason, they can, versus our systems pushing real-time data out. So air gap has been something that, again, we have talked about in the past, and hoping something we can support long-term to support both these use cases, right? Where it's like security or whatnot, or whatever way we can control that flow of data, since it's going to the public internet.
Yep. Thanks, Joe. And I saw another hand raised.
Yeah, I think based on this discussion, if I understand correctly, does telemetry have an option to export a JSON, just like the feedback we are getting, and that JSON file or whatever way the users can share feedback based on a particular time interval that they desire? I think that can be shared, and that JSON or that output can be filtered from their end or from their security team and then sent to community. Is there something that the telemetry module has still, the functionality?
So we can preview a report, and there'll be a JSON report that can be saved into file, but we don't have an automatic mechanism around it. Basically, we can change the frequency of the report sending to be once in a month even. But I believe the idea here is to be able to manually upload it to the endpoint and not do that automatically from the cluster. But yes, there's a way to preview the report, and it can be saved as a file.
But there's not yet a way to change what you're reporting aside from toggling the individual channels. I think the question was getting around, like, can they print the JSON output, send that to the security team, have the security team edit it however they see, and then send that modified version. But I don't think you can't do it at that level. But there is a way to toggle individual channels on and off. So Yuri, I don't know if you want to speak on that more, but if that's even possible.
Yeah, so to tweak the report to that extent, it's impossible. Like you said, we can turn channels on or off, but we cannot control certain fields there. So basically, if the user can save the report to a file, and then the security team can look at that and redact whatever they want to redact, and then just a manual part of uploading that to our server. That's basically the missing piece here. Yeah, but this is something that we can definitely look into if there's any interest in the community for that.
Great.
Well,
Yeah, and if
good news is that's not
Go
the
ahead.
only. I mean, the good news is that's not the only reason we are seeing less than 50% of adoption. Not sure of its purpose. I think now at least 40 people on the call know what telemetry does and why we value it so much. And not enough publicity. We'll take care of that in future events.
Yes, and we appreciate this feedback. So thank you so much. And we will have some action items to handle that. So thank you. And if there is anything that you would like to see with telemetry, we'll be happy to hear that as well.
Yeah, I just shared the, please feel free to write any comments, or if you have specific security or privacy concerns, you can write it on that pad so Yuri can review it later. This would be really, really valuable to know. Thank you. So what was that?
Just saying thanks to everyone.
Yes. All right, we'll conclude there because I know you're each your time sensitive. So thank you so much for being here today, and I think that was valuable to discuss. And I know you were concerned about the whether the amount of publicity, but I think more is always appreciated. I think, which is the opposite of what you were thinking. So
yeah, I was worried.
We're always wanting to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm always worried that we talk about it too much, but I understand that it's we don't talk about it enough. So I'm very grateful for this feedback. So we'll take care of that and make sure we have some more publications about telemetry. Thanks.
All right. So I'll move on to the performance highlights, since that was pretty extensive. So Neha, if you want to jump in at any point about some of the stuff that I pulled, feel free. There was quite a lot of questions that we asked, and some even about, we asked about network configuration and performance requirements, and we haven't even quite sifted through all of that. But I wanted to pull the most specific highlights and pieces of feedback that we may be able to, zoom in on and act on. So one of the topics we asked was what kind of cluster events have a specific impact on your performance. A couple things that were brought up: monitor sync during host reboot or upgrade, which results in inactive PGs. OSD unavailability. For instance, if an OSD goes down, it will cause 30 seconds IO pause for a part of the clients. That type of a comment is a lot what we're looking for, something specific, and where this responder described, the exact amount of time that downtime it causes for their clients. That gives us a better picture, instead of answering something like OSD unavailability and leaving it at that. So good comment there. Another comment was deleting snapshots and scrubbing, especially snapshot deleting with mclock impacts the traffic, which was way better with WPQ. So that was a common theme that came up about mclock and op schedulers, and we asked some more specific questions about that in the next slide. And then there were a few other themes about or non-specific scenarios that people mentioned, such as rebalancing and backfill, that had impact on their clusters. But we would like to know more specific details about these events in order to act on them. So this goes back to, if anybody in this call has anything specific that they can offer about a specific, performance event concerning rebalancing or backfill, we'd like to hear that. Or you can raise a tracker and we can go down that avenue further that way. And then another interesting highlight, we asked what kinds of EC plugins people are using. For the most part, people responded that they use the default plugins, which are Gerasier and the Reed-Solomon-Vandermonde technique. Some also, I think one person responded ESA as well. And this kind of tells us that people are less likely to try the non-default EC plugins, and we would be interested in knowing if anybody out in the wild has experimented with these non-default plugins and what their experience has been like, since we're always interested in knowing if something non-default has had a positive performance impact, so or even a negative performance impact. We would like to know that. So if anybody has those kinds of stories, we're interested. But Neha or any of the audience members, feel free to comment on anything on the slide before we move on.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm particularly interested to find out is that we got mixed responses about mclock performance. Some people said that it's just working very well out of the box. Some people are still having issues, and they're switching back to WPQ. There have been a lot of performance improvements that we've been making in the latest releases. Even the upcoming release will have a bunch of performance improvements. But here I'm particularly looking for examples, tracker issues where people are still facing issues. Um, some things have come to our knowledge, some have not. So we're looking for concerted feedback here. That's a comment.
I don't think we've done focus testing with SnapTrim. That should be the thing we test next.
Yeah, I think the rebalancing and backfill part we have already improved. So it'll be good to see which versions these users are actually running, because early versions did have problems with recovery.
And do we have an idea, Neha, that, to the extent of impact, is somewhere range between, below 10%, 10, 20%, above 30%, things like that? Do we have a range of impact? I mean, those things are, I understand it's probably reasonable to have it. Well, it's not surprised to have an impact. It's just to the impact that is significant enough that, impact the applications.
Yeah, I think I didn't see any particular numbers as such. But this is such a thing that that it's very easy to go back to the old default. So people don't even go to the extent of figuring out how much the impact is. They just switch back to the old default because that's been just working for them. I think that,
Okay.
I mean, users on the call can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what the natural tendency I've seen, that like, okay, this is not working well, let's just go back to WPQ because it was just doing the job, right? And it's very easy to switch. It's not like you have to like, redeploy or anything.
Hmm.
Okay, somebody has a comment here. We noticed increased client latencies while backfilling. We have, okay, so yeah, that's what I was trying to say. So I think if you can create a tracker, that'd be really useful. I know you've switched back to WPQ, so you don't have any issues, and you probably don't care about it as much. But in order for us to improve the default behavior, we do need data points from the community.
Yes, especially which build was being used, and information around how much performance, so what kind of performance impact they saw. Because post Quincy and later builds of Quincy, we did have improvements around backfill and recovery areas, and so also the snapstream related stuff. So yeah, it will be really interesting to know which builds and what kind of impact that users are observing.
The specific information that would be useful is you should post the size of your cluster, as much information as possible about the hardware, including the number of OSDs, the type of OSDs, SSD or hard disk, the processors, the number of cores per OSD, which we can figure out if you provided everything else. And then also the client workload that was running at the time, including the access mode, is it object or block or file? What percentage of the cluster's maximum throughput was it sustaining at the time, and what change in latency did you see, and how did you measure it? That's the information we need in order to properly reproduce it. If we can't reproduce it, we can't fix it. Thank you.
Sorry, I have an interesting question there. Maybe we've completely missed it, but how do you quantify a cluster's maximum throughput?
If you're doing 4K random writes, you do as many 4K random writes as you can, and you see what the maximum number you can get out of the whole cluster is, regardless of latency. That's the maximum throughput. Then usually if you're doing latency testing, you test at something like 80% of that number, since you don't really expect decent latency at 100% of anything's capacity. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but I guess it's semantically slightly misleading. That's the maximum throughput from a single FIO job into a.
Sorry, I don't mean a single FIO job. I mean as many FIO jobs as required to get the highest possible number, whatever that works out to be.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's more of a cluster. So basically, spin up FIO with 4K random access.
Yeah, you don't want this to be, if that's your workload. If your workload isn't 4K random writes, then attempt to try to create a workload pattern that does match it.
And then scale that up until basically saturation.
Yeah, the goal here isn't to be client limited. We don't care about the client limits here. There are a lot of contexts where we do, but in this case, we're trying to figure out the maximum number of whatever your cluster can do.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was curious about that because in our experience, it's not it's not math, right? It's not like I can go, here's my drives, here's my OSDs, and calculate something. So this is a useful.
No, it's a composite. It's a composite behavior of the whole system, so you typically need to measure it.
No, that's why I was asking, because if there was a formula, enter information in spreadsheet, calculate number here, that'd be great. But that's totally cool. I think we should probably document that for everybody, right? So they can try and kick the tires on what the performance limits of their clusters are.
That's true. We don't have any. I mean, this part isn't special to Ceph. That's how I probably test anything with capacity and latency properties. But yeah, we could put a documentation page up for that kind of thing.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
We have a few comments in the chat here. Okay, yes, everybody agrees documenting is a good idea. Philip, you want to talk about your thing? Firefly.
So if you like to, we used especially for OpenStack clouds Fireplot to see decent graphs of how much bytes we can get through. Nice tool to have. You have a lot of options and it automates all the file runs for you.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think we want to probably wrap up this topic. So I think the idea is clear. We are looking for concerted feedback. So if anybody has the information that, and also like, it's one of those things that's not white or black. So some people actually like the fact that there are only three controls here. There are just three profiles. So there's like high client, high recovery, and there's balance. And the part that I think is kind of hidden in all of this is that mclock is actually differentiating between degraded objects and misplaced objects. So that is one thing that is very attractive about mclock, which WPQ doesn't do. So in terms of data safety, mclock will ensure that you have enough copies as quickly as possible. And that's where the differentiation between degraded and misplaced comes from. So I don't know if anybody's noticed it, but next time you have an event such as this, take a look. But I think we can move on, Laura.
Sure. Yeah, the next slide was talking more about op schedulers and mclock. So we already touched on a lot of this, but most people are using mclock, but there are also some that were unaware of which op scheduler they were using. So that kind of tells me that maybe those particular responders didn't have any issues with the op schedulers, that they didn't know which one they were using. But overall for mclock, the positives were that it's speedy, good mix of automation and configuration, and that it dynamically changes according to I/O. The caveats were lack of documentation. And somebody mentioned a lot of the documentation still references WPQ. I can't recall the documentation specifically off the top of my head, but it would certainly be a low-hanging fruit to investigate. And that there's and the second caveat was complicated manual configuration, and that it needs tuning to work well off the bat. So again, as Neha was saying, specific scenarios are much welcome here. Even about the documentation, if you want to raise a docs tracker and point to a specific page that you find confusing, that would be helpful. But even more so about, we'd like to know more about what complicated manual configuration people are experiencing and what exactly are they having issues with. And overall, the WPQ thoughts were that it's stable and it works, and that's why people are using it who maybe are not wanting to adopt mclock yet. And then I pulled out one caveat. That overall, there were no caveats about WPQ, but somebody mentioned undesirable behavior with the Ceph config. But we would like more clarification on this because it was a pretty vague comment. So if you really want that addressed, specific. I think, okay, I just had these last two slides, but I want to open it first to, just so I'm not talking and, talking at people the whole time. I want to bring it up to the floor for any comments or, questions that people have that are attending, or any additional feedback that you want to add. All right, if there's nothing, I'll just go to the last two slides, but please feel free to raise a hand to stop me at any point. The last bits were snapshots. We asked how many people are using them. About half are using snapshots, about half are not. And those who are using snapshots, a lot said rarely. So I think we're kind of leaning toward not or rarely using them. But those who were using them mentioned RBD snapshots. And there was one comment in particular that was very specific. They would like to be able to remove RBD snapshots at scale with less hassle and latency spikes. And they pointed to a well-known issue with iteration over collection in RocksDB. So this might be something that's already being addressed. Not quite sure, but it was nevertheless a specific comment that we could, look at more closely. We asked about asynchronous and synchronous cluster replication capabilities. Most said that they do not use these or didn't know, but then those who did mentioned RBD mirror, RGB multi-site, pool replication, and stretch clusters. And then I mentioned this before, but we asked about total raw capacity deployed. Most said that they deploy 1 petabyte to 50 petabytes. There were some that selected 50 plus petabytes, but overall, no matter what people's size, they did also mention that they were looking to expand their clusters, either by expanding existing clusters or adding new ones. So even the 50 plus petabytes are still looking to expand on this. Any comments about this particular set of highlights?
Anybody here on the call who's using Ceph-based asynchronous or synchronous cluster application and wants to share their experience? Sounds like nobody. Okay.
Can always circle back to that. And then the last thing was just we asked, what are overall your favorite aspects of Ceph, and overall, what are some areas for Ceph to improve? And people mentioned that they like that Ceph is self-healing, durable, flexible, configurable, resilient, it scales well, and it's fault tolerant. So that's all what we like to see. But of course, zooming in on the areas to improve, somebody mentioned data center network split brain scenario. Not sure if whoever said that is on the call right now, but I'd like to know more about that scenario. Performance, so that's something that we're definitely trying to improve, again, by asking these surveys and getting more concerted feedback there. They'd like to see more resilience on network failures and improvement on MDS locking, and better documentation for advanced users. So please, if there are any of these topics, I see a hand raised. Go ahead. Who's Joel? I can't hear you if you're speaking.
That.
Okay, there we go.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about
No worries.
So I didn't fill out the survey because I've been heads down on trying to get the MON recovery from OSD procedure working with Ceph ADM. But I have had a spine outage on our network in our prod cluster Ceph that avoided network split brain just by luck because of the way we had grown out the cluster. All our MONs were clustered under one leaf pair switch or switch pair. So they basically all had the same view of the cluster the whole time. But I'm not sure what would happen if we had MONs under different leaf pairs in that same scenario where they would all have different views of what was going on in the cluster and how they would recover once the network was fixed and communication reestablished. So I think
that should work. You might have unavailability until you get enough connectivity back, but it shouldn't cause data loss.
Yeah, and there is a different election mode that handles it, the connectivity, not the classic. That's
yeah, but we're running.
No, hang on, Neha, that's not relevant here. Sorry.
He's talking about that.
Are you?
Yeah.
We're running the classic mode for elections right now, and I'm aware that there's the connectivity mode, which I really haven't thought about a lot or tested out or tried, which I would like.
Are you running a cluster split across 2 different data centers?
It's one data center. But
yeah, this is normal. This is then you should be running the normal election mode. This should be fine.
Yes, we are running the normal election mode. I hope it will be fine, but I'm running a production cluster, so should doesn't really change the way I feel about the situation.
I mean, we explicitly test that case.
Okay, well, it would be great for me to understand how it's been tested and exactly what the scenarios that have been tested are. I mean, I know testing is a very hard thing, and I appreciate all the work that is done to test. But there's always edge cases. There's situations that maybe a tester didn't think of that happen in the real world. There's things that happen. So testing is great, and again, I appreciate all the work that is put into it, but it's completely opaque to me. So I have no idea what's been tested when, what the scenarios were, what the components were, the versions of things, the architectures of things. There's a lot of unknowns. Like I said, the testing is opaque to me. So
Yeah, I mean,
just to circle back at the high level, I think the split brain scenario, whatever the perspective is from the Ceph developers internally to at least some operators, is a big question mark.
I mean, so it's pretty relevant now because we are actually expanding our NetSplit suite that is again supposed to be handling multiple data centers and Netflix scenarios in those. But this is a good time to actually bring up the scenario that you're talking about, and we can show you what kind of test coverage we have. There's a lot under the hood in pathology that is not very easily understandable to anybody who doesn't understand pathology that well. But we'd be happy to explain whether we are covering that by means of our automated testing or not.
Also, by automated testing here, we're talking about a test suite that runs in every pull request and every release.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I don't understand Teuthology. I haven't spent any time on it. And testing on releases is great. We do that internally for our own software development, CI/CD type stuff. So that's all really good. But you only find what you test for. So testing is great, but it doesn't cover everything.
In the interest of time, we've got a minute left, so I don't want to leave anybody bleeding over. But thank you very much for interacting today. And I just shared in the chat, and also it's on the Etherpad. I reopened the survey for a bit if you want to take it for the first time or even retake it now that you know how we interpret the data. So feel free to do that, and we'll still be looking at any new responses there. I'll probably close it by the end of today or tomorrow, so it's not open for too much longer. But now that you know how we interpret it, please feel free to take the survey. And I'll be sharing the recording for this meeting, and as well as the slides.
So
those
Laura,
will be visible on.
Before we conclude,
Yeah.
I think I want to just emphasize the purpose of this. We have a good enough presence here for people to acknowledge why this is important, and we also have the reason that you're seeing these performance and orchestration questions to re-emphasize that we have Matthew from Bloomberg and Vincent from IBM, who are foundation members who are trying hard to get valuable feedback from the community to improve Ceph in general. So if you guys have anything to say or anything to add, please feel free. But the messaging is clear. This is not a general survey that we do for for every release or something. This is going to be more often. The idea is that we want to close the loop. So things that we talked about are on the orchestrator, things that we're talking about mClock, we do want to close those loops. So if you can help us with the information we need to close those loops, we'd be very thankful.
Yes, and what we're workshopping right now, is going the tracker route. So if you open a tracker based on anything here, if you add it to the Etherpad here, I will be sure to tag it accordingly. So then, and then we can, keep tabs on these issues that were brought up and actually make progress on them, and then people from the community will be able to see updates on the individual trackers as well. So that's, we really would like to see trackers come from this feedback with specific data, like what Sam mentioned. And yeah, huge thanks to Matt's dropping. Huge thanks to Matthew Leonard and to Vincent for being the orchestration and performance champions for the user council, and we're looking to get more engagement. So if you're interested in being a part of the user council or championing your own topic, please reach out to either me or Neha. And if you're thinking, I really want to talk about stretch clusters, that's the topic I want to do, we'd love to hear that. And if you want to champion a topic like that, feel free to reach out to Neha or me, and we will we'll connect with you.